have expressed their concerns about financial reform and their desire to work in a bipartisan way, and I welcome that. So I am going to lay out some ideas that I hope could have Republican support. Not sure that they will, but I would love to see it, because I think the vast majority of the people in our country are profoundly disgusted with the behavior on Wall Street, the greed, the recklessness, the illegal behavior which has led us to the terrible recession that we find ourselves in today. So I just want to tick off a couple of issues that I hope my Republican colleagues would be interested in working with me on. Every week I receive, and I suspect you do, Madam President, and many of my colleagues do, telephone calls and letters and emails from people in our states who are outraged by the kind of interest rates they are forced to pay, interest rates which to my mind are nothing less than usury, a usury which has been condemned by every major religion in this world, usury which has been condemned throughout history by some of our great philosophers and writers who have basically said that it is wrong and immoral to force desperate people who are in need of loans to pay outrageous interest rates. And yet today, more than 1/4 of all credit card holders in this country are paying interest rates above 20%, and in some cases as high as 79%. That, from my perspective, is not providing credit. That is loan sharking. That is doing precisely what criminals do when they lend people money and then they break their kneecaps if they don't pay it back on time, except the people, the loan sharks who are doing this now, wear three-piece suits, and they don't break kneecaps, but they destroy lives. They destroy lives by forcing people to pay outrageously high interest rates when people are using their credit cards to buy their groceries, to fill up their gas tanks, to get to work, to pay for the basic needs that their families have. Madam President, millions of credit card holders have received letters from Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and J.P. Morgan Chase notifying them that their interest rates are going up, in some cases to 30%. And a point that has to be made is that these four large banks, the four largest banks in America, issue 2/3 of the credit cards in this country. And these four banks are ripping off the American people from one end of this country to the other. And it is time that that outrageous behavior ended. So, Madam President, I hope that my Republican colleagues who have come to the floor expressing concern about Wall Street, I hope that what they're saying is more than just rhetoric, that they really want to do something. And if they want to do something, I hope very much that they will join me when I offer an amendment as part of financial reform to cap credit card interest rates at 15%. And that is the same statutory cap that has been in existence for 30 years at credit unions all over this country. So credit unions are doing just fine. But by law, they can't ask for more than 15%, except under certain circumstances when it can go up to 18%. And I think if that's good enough for credit unions all across this country, it should be good enough for Citibank, good enough for Bank of America, good enough for Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan Chase and other large financial institutions. Madam President, if my Republican friends are sincere, I hope they will join me in supporting efforts to bring transparency to the Federal Reserve. And that amendment that I intend to offer will do just that. And what we need to do, among many other things, is we need to understand which financial institutions during the bailout received over $2 trillion in secret taxpayer-backed loans, virtually interest-free. Who are they? I can tell you that last year, as a member of the Budget Committee, I asked Fed Chairman Bernanke that very simple question, and he said no, he is not going to tell me which financial institutions, not going to tell the American people which financial institutions receive trillions of taxpayer dollars. Well, I've got a problem with that. I think the American people do, and we're going to offer an amendment as part of financial reform in order to understand what, in fact, is happening, to demand transparency there. Madam President, in April of last year, the Senate voted 59 to 39 on an amendment that I offered with Senators Webb, Bunning, and Feingold to the budget resolution calling on the Fed to release this information. And yet, as of this day, the Fed has refused to do that. In August of last year, federal U.S. District Judge Loretta Preska, nominated by President George W. Bush, ordered the Federal Reserve to release this information. The Fed appealed that decision, and last March, the U.S. Appeals Court in Manhattan upheld that decision. Yet the Fed has still not disclosed this information. And over 300 members of Congress have co-sponsored legislation calling on an independent audit of the Fed. In other words, Madam President, we now have 59 senators, over 300 members of Congress, a U.S. District Court judge, and a U.S. Appeals Court that have said to the chairman of the Fed, Mr. Bernanke, in no uncertain terms, that the American people have a right to know the names of the largest banks in this country that have received over $2 trillion in taxpayer-backed loans from the Federal Reserve. So if my Republican friends are sincere, if they really want to take on the greed and the recklessness of Wall Street, if they want to give the American people transparency as to what's happening on Wall Street, I certainly hope they will support that amendment. Madam President, I also hope that we can receive support to address the issue of too big to fail. And in that regard, I have offered legislation which is pretty simple. And it says that the Treasury Department would provide a list to Congress of all the too-big-to-fail banks in this country within 90 days of passage of that legislation and break them up within a year so that they can no longer threaten to bring down the economy if, once again, they get into trouble. Madam President, quite amazingly, and I think most people don't understand this, under the leadership of the Bush administration and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, the largest financial institutions since the bailout have not gotten smaller. In fact, they have gotten larger. In 2008, the Bank of America, the largest commercial bank in this country, which received a $45 billion taxpayer bailout, purchased Countrywide, the largest mortgage lender in this country, and Merrill Lynch, the largest brokerage firm in this country. In other words, what we are seeing in at least 3 out of the 4 largest banks in this country is, since the bailout, they have become even larger, becoming an even greater threat to the financial stability of this country if, once again, they're ever in a position to fail. Madam President, the issue of large banks is not just that they are a threat to the stability of our economy if they are about to fail. The other aspect of that problem is the concentration of ownership that currently exists. When you have 4 large financial institutions that issue 2/3 of the credit cards in this country and half of the mortgages, you have a very dangerous and non-competitive type situation. And I think, given the fact that we have seen these financial institutions issue esoteric and non-understandable financial instruments whose only goal is to secure more money and profits and compensation packages for the CEOs of these institutions. We need to start breaking them up and have financial institutions that understand that their role is to provide credit to the productive economy, the businesses in this country that actually produce real products, provide real services, and create real jobs. In other words, we need to break them up to create a new Wall Street, which becomes part of the United States of America, part of our economy, not an isolated island whose only goal in life is to issue worthless financial instruments in order to make outrageous short-term profits. And that is a huge issue that we have got to deal with. So, Madam President, if my Republican colleagues are in fact sincere, if they want to do more than follow pollster Frank Luntz's playbook and throw out certain words that they think will work for them politically, I look forward to their support for real financial reform. Bottom line is we cannot continue to do what we have done for a number of years. We have got to summon the courage, and it will take courage, because Wall Street is enormously powerful. In order to get the deregulation that led us to the financial disaster that we experienced a year and a half ago, over a 10-year period, Wall Street spent the unbelievable sum of money of $5 billion on campaign contributions and lobbying. Frankly, I don't even know how you can spend that kind of money. But nonetheless, it certainly worked, and against my vote, when I was in the House, they got the deregulation they wanted. And lo and behold, once they were deregulated, to not my surprise, they went out and did all kinds of very, very strange things, reckless things, illegal things, which brought us to where we were a year and a half ago. So I think what we need is real financial reform. We need a cap on interest rates so that Wall Street cannot continue to rip off ordinary Americans. We need transparency at the Fed. We need to know which financial institutions are receiving trillions of dollars of taxpayer money. We need to begin the process of breaking up these huge financial institutions, not only from a too-big-to-fail concern, but also from a concentration of ownership issue, because you're going to need a lot more competition in the financial industry than we have right now. So we will find out soon enough whether our Republican friends are doing more than reading from a pollster's playbook, or whether they are serious about taking on Wall Street. I have my doubts, but I hope that I'm wrong. And I hope that we will gain their support in bringing real reform to our financial institutions. And with that, Madam Chair, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.